We're now going to go into our second part of the candidates forum, where each candidate can ask up to 3 questions to any of the candidates here, and each candidate who is allotted 2 minutes to respond to each question. And our first candidate up is Reverend Douglas Maven, who will be asking the first set of questions. You may proceed, Mr. Maven.
Yes, I'd like to first ask my fellow candidates, each of you can answer, how will you convince other council members that your ideas or plans are preferable to their own? And how will you build consensus among council members on issues?
Mr. Maven, you want them to go down in order?
Yes.
Okay. We'll start with Mr. Kim McDaniel.
Thank you, Reverend Maven, for that question. Well, I can speak from experience since I have served on the City Council. And what I always attempt to do is lay out everything that I'm trying to set forth. I speak from an area of common sense, and I can always answer questions. I come to the fellow council members with respect. I don't come to the members saying that, well, my idea must be better than yours. I'm cooperative and I'm willing to work, and I believe that the answers don't always come from just one individual. We work together as a team and in an effort to do what's best for Patterson.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rev, for that question. So to build consensus and encourage other of your colleagues to agree with your ideas, pretty much in a nutshell. Am I clear with that, the question? Okay. And that's very, very important. I told a group of seniors yesterday that I want to be straightforward with you. I'm not going to make you any promises or any commitments, because I understand, and based on your question, it put emphasis on the fact that one individual cannot do anything alone. So that question is very, very important. People promise you things and they tell you they're going to do things, but without the support of at least 4 more colleagues, none of your ideas will come into fruition. So I'm glad you asked that question to the public. The first thing I do is I would first find a common ground. My intent would be to put forth legislation that benefits the people. If it doesn't improve the conditions of our people, if it doesn't benefit our people, if it doesn't provide change where it's necessary, then if that doesn't convince them to support it, then I don't have any other recourse. You know, I would rely upon everything that they talked about during the campaign season, even make reference to it, you know, in regards to helping out and addressing the issues of the people, and I'd use that as my formula for support. And if that doesn't work, then it wasn't meant to be. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next. So, great question, Reverend Maven. Great question. So when we talk about building consensus, it's not so much how are you going to do it, but what have you already done to show that you have the capacity or the expertise to make it happen. So as a former school board commissioner, as a pastor, as a leader, one of the things that's very important in building consensus or getting other people to come alongside with the plan that you have is, number one, what's the vision? What are you trying to drive? Where are you trying to go? And what's the benefit? It always has to be a benefit over the differences of opinion. And so you have to bring forth whatever the item is through relationships with your fellow council people, with the mayor, through the administration. You have to be able to sit down and understand what is the vision overall for the city, how are we driving that vision, and then you got to get in some instances where one person but in some instances, you need 4 other votes, or you need 5. When it comes to budgetary items, there's some issues, when it comes to adding on to the budget, you need 6. So you have to ensure that it's always about benefit over your differences of opinion. You have to make sure that whatever you're trying to do, or whatever your platform or vision is, that the residents in City of Patterson are first. You have to make sure you engage the community in the process. So it's not just you trying to get the council to listen to you, but it's always best to have the community come forward, so it's not just you fighting, but they hear the community as well. I think that's important, because when you leave the community out, it's all about you, and this is not an I thing, it's a we thing, and we have to move towards that.
Thank you. Just a moment.
How are you, sir?
I'm fine.
Keeping with the spirit of this election, I read in a newspaper yesterday that the other candidates refused to ask each other's questions. And that was my mind frame when I came here, because I really like the spirit exemplified by the candidates. And I'm not here to dim, bash, or degrade. I'm here to simply put my platform out. I appreciate your question. I humbly decline to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Maven. You have 2 more questions that you may ask.
One of the issues that has not come up much in our debates, forums around the city, is the issue of the flooding of Patterson. And I'd like to just ask Brother Melvin and Sister Mims if they would respond to what do you know about the impact of the flooding issue that it has on Patterson, and what can be done about it? Brother Melvin.
Oh, okay, yes, and I'd like to write down the question so I can be direct in answering. So the impact of flooding and what could be done. During the previous mayor's election and council's election, I had the opportunity to sit down and have lengthy discussions. In fact, I was involved with some of the affairs that were taking place during our previous flooding and storm incidents. We provided, my organization that I'm a part of, the Brothers Organization, had provided sanitary goods, some water and food to some of the folk who were stranded in shelters. I've even had some people employed with remediation to help bring a lot of those flooded homes back to status. And what I've noticed is pretty much every severe rainstorm, certain parts of the city will experience flooding. So much so that in the during the previous administration, the President of the United States had to come and provide services. I believe that something, not only from our local government, but something that we need participatory services with not only our local government, with the federal government, and our county government as well, to make sure that those areas that experience flooding don't continue to experience those same types of atrocities that they've experienced previously. I kind of in agreement, and I'm willing to support legislatively, if I'm elected, to remove all of those vital areas that experience flooding and turn them into parks. From my understanding, that was the previous plan, to make them parks. They've talked about building some sort of damming services to control the water. So there are some things on the table already. I don't want to come and reinvent the wheel. I want to support the ideas that's already there, but the ideas that are already there, but I do agree that those areas that experience heavy flooding should not be allowed for people to habitate.
I think this is a great question. I'm not really sure if people really understand the dynamic of the sewer blockage issues that we have in Patterson. I mean, they've been here for a long time, but we also know that we have some financial deficits, and we're in duress in Patterson. When it floods, I'm not sure if we realize that when you go to the drains that are located all throughout the city, they back up because we have some drainage issue, piping issues that are in need of major repair, major work, and it requires financing. And I know we've been trying to get that done for some years. So I would like to push and to partner with our local, state, national, and federal partners and areas of government to identify resources to be able to resolve some of those issues. Also, to find grants. I believe we need a grant writer. I also am proposing a program management office for our community. And what does that do? It curbs wasteful spending. It also ensures that we have a project manager, so when we have issues such as flooding, they're prevented. We have someone that is watching through the meteorologist, what is the prediction of the weather, so we can go through. We also need to do cost inventory control through our DPW department to make sure the trucks are working, or are they up to speed, do they need repair? We need to do that more frequently to ensure that when we're providing equipment to our workers, that they have what they need to get the job done. So those are the two issues. We have to make sure there's resources and finances in place, but we have to also make sure the equipment that we have is up to speed to ensure that we can unblock those clogs to avoid the flooding issue in the city.
Thank you. That's it, my question, Madam President.
That's the end of your three, no, you don't have a third question?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Reverend Maven. Our next candidate up for question and answer period is Kenneth McDaniel.
Okay, I do have three questions written down, and I guess they're open for anyone and everyone who would like to respond. I'll start with, these questions are dealing with city government, public administration, things like this, what you would be doing as a city council person. Can you guys tell the residents, the viewers, what the components of a resolution and/or ordinance are?
Anybody?
Anyone who wishes to answer, Mr. McDaniel?
I'll go first. That's a great question, because we're going to be, I mean, what is a council person if they can't write a resolution, right? If they can't draft a resolution. And I'm going to give you the summary of it as I understand it. For one, from participating in years of council meetings and workshops, I have copies of resolutions and ordinances. The components of a resolution starts off with a motion. And from the motion has to be second, and then a whereas and a be it resolved has to be drafted. So you pretty much have to talk about the issue, the whereas part, and what it involves, what it entails, and then measures on what type of issue would it resolve. You know, a resolution is designed to resolve an issue. And then it has to be voted upon, and you need a majority vote for it to be approved. Now, as far as the specifics, from what I understand, resolutions are drafted with the support of the clerk and corporate counsel, because a person can draft a resolution or an ordinance and it be totally illegal. So if it's not congruent with New Jersey legislation or our Constitution for that matter, then that resolution can be overturned. That's my basic understanding of a resolution and an ordinance. Thank you for that.
You going to answer? Are you going to answer?
Well, I can. A resolution is designed for a call of action on an item or issue for the council. In terms of process, I'm sure it's reviewed by legal to see if it conflicts with any existing laws or ordinances that are already on the books. Certainly has to come before the workshop, whether you discuss it, the pros and cons of it. I think there's 2 readings of it before it becomes up for a vote on the council floor, and it's voted up by the majority of the council and enacted.
So the question was resolution and ordinance, that's what you're saying?
The components.
The components, okay. So before even drafting any type of language or initiating a resolution, first and foremost, you have to make sure that there is no current ordinance or statute on the book. Because you can have a great idea, but it's already there, just possibly needs to be enforced. So that's number one. Number two, you have to make sure the language that's being drafted is approved through Corporation Council. You have to make sure the language fits into some of the union coding, some of that language. You have to make sure it fits into and draft some of the statute, the labor laws that are in place. You have to make sure that within that, language that it has the approval after it's drafted, after it's approved. It has to have signatures on it. After all of that is done, then it is presented in different steps of reading. So you have a first reading, you have a second reading, and then you can go through the approval process. But it's also good, depending on what the resolution is for. Is it public safety? Is it finance or whatever? It's always good to talk through it with your committee, because there are committees that are in place. It's always great to talk it out through your committee to ensure that you're on the same page. It's no good to draft a resolution and you don't have the votes. So it's always good to get the insight, wisdom, or the counsel of your fellow colleagues to ensure that what you're trying to initiate, that they can partner with. And so there's so many different steps to it before you get to a final vote or before we move. And then even after the second reading, it takes about, I think it's like 21 days or something like that. I can't remember the days, but there's still time after that before it's actually initiated. So there's many steps in it, but you still have to get buy-in from your colleagues. Make sure you talk it out in your committee meetings to ensure that it's something that benefits not only what you're trying to do, but we have to make sure everything we draft has the community in mind.
Yep.
Oh, again, how are you, sir? Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Although the Do It for Love Foundation received a resolution in 2013, again, I came here to keep this spirit intact, so I humbly decline your question. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll keep the next question in the same category. Thank you for responding to the first. So staying in that same idea, can you tell us what the differences are between a resolution and an ordinance? And I guess we'll start with Reverend Maven.
To be honest with you, no, I cannot. I don't have the experience, but I'm willing to learn.
Thank you, Reverend.
Okay, I don't think I have anything to lose to take a chance on this one. A difference between a resolution and an ordinance. I know an ordinance, I'll start off with that one, is a law. It's like a law, it's a municipal law, an ordinance. And a resolution, I believe, is just like a proclamation to resolve an issue, to address an issue. Be it resolved. I don't have the technical definition, but I know factually that an ordinance is a municipal law, and then an ordinance is, a resolution is to address, to resolve an issue. And I'll leave it at that. It's to resolve an issue. It's designed to resolve an issue.
Thank you.
So in my understanding, and we have to be clear here, we are not current council members, so we are running to receive that seat. So in the understanding of resolution and ordinance from being in the council meetings and having the agenda, when you look at resolutions, they're pushing things, for example, like we want to ensure that the coin-operated laundromat is being able to continue doing business. But when you look at an ordinance, it's a law that has to be pushed and enforced through the mayor's office. So when it comes to resolutions, there's things that can be initiated directly through the council that are able to be pushed, but ordinance have to be pushed and enforced through the administrative level. So there are some things that are enforceable through ordinance that through resolution you don't have to go through administration, like saying I want to give a proclamation or a plaque to a church that's been in service for 26 years. You can just do a resolution to provide that where it does not have to be directly administered or enforced through the administration, such as the mayor's office.
Thank you. I believe that Sister Muhammad has voiced her position, so I don't think we should force her to repeat. I'll move on to the third and final question. The City Council deals with governance. What has your educational and/or professional experience been with administrative law or public administration? I should say and/or public administration.
I'll share my experience with as Commissioner for Board of Social Services, Passaic County Board of Social Services. We oversee the administrative budget for all of Passaic County programs that address the issues of the poor and the needy. Administrative position as Commissioner for Public Passaic Housing Authority allows us to oversee administration of funds, federal funds, millions of dollars in federal funds, primarily through HUD for the development of housing in our city. I'm a trustee for the Hood Theological Seminary, our major seminary, Salisbury, North Carolina. Serve as assistant secretary to that board in our university in Salisbury, North Carolina. Administrator for our nomination board of church and growth development as its secretary as well. So all the legislation and resolutions that we have to pass to go through the General Conference of the AME Zion Church, oversee and draft most of those resolutions, myself as secretary of the board. Just to name a few of my involvements.
Thank you, Reverend.
Okay, as far as educational background or experience with administrative law in reference to government, I don't think that there is a criterion for one to suggest, petition, grieve, or enact a law. If an individual feels, and it's their constitutional right, to propose legislation through a process, they have a process for any individual who would like to propose legislation and present it to their local government. They have the constitutional right to grieve government, and they have the constitutional right to petition the government without any professional or academic background. The process for one to enact legislation is you have to get a petition of a certain amount of signatures based on the last amount of people who came out in the previous election. Once you get those signatures, you can then draft a resolution and present it to government. So in short, you don't need an administrative or academic degree or level of professionalism to do that. That's everybody's constitutional right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Melvin.
So the question was, what is your experience in public administration or government? So as I stated in my introduction, I'm a former school board member. I served there for the last 3.5 years as an elected official with a budget that was almost twice this city's budget. So when it comes to administration and public service work, that's a part of my experience. I am a pastor in the city. I founded the church that I serve as the pastor over 9 years ago, starting with 0 members and building that capacity, and it's continually growing. As far as government experience, it continues to grow by being the vice chairman of the planning board for the city. So I've been very heavily involved with the economic development process by coming and being a part of those meetings and being able to have input and give guidance and wisdom and insight on behalf of the residents in the city to ensure that businesses are coming in, to make sure that when they're building or bringing in ratables that the residents are included, to make sure that if they're hiring 5 employees, that at least half of those employees are Patterson residents. So when it comes to government, I think Casey said it best, it's not a requirement to run for this office, but I've been doing it, serving in these capacities to ensure that I had the experience to ensure that I hit the ground running when I came to be your next councilwoman at large.
Thank you, Reverend Mims, and thank you to all 4 candidates.
Thank you, Mr. McDaniel. The next candidate up for question and answer would be Mr. Casey Melvin.
Okay, thank you. I want to begin my first question, and this is to all the candidates, and Sister Angela, if she decides to participate. What is your idea, or what is your vision to address the youth violence in the city of Patterson? I'd like to start with Sister Angela, if you don't mind.
Again, I will say this, since we work together in the streets to curb the violence, that's something that you know, and I humbly decline. Thank you.
Yeah, you can, Ms. Smith.
Okay, just trying to bring order, right? So when it comes to, I have to go back to the fact that I'm born and raised in Patterson. I was born in the 4th Ward. I currently live in the 3rd, but I lived in the 1st, 2nd, and my church is in the 5th. And so we always talk about what do we plan to do to curb the violence. But the first thing we have to understand is that these are some people's children. These are their sons, their daughters, their nephews, their nieces that are out there. And the first thing is we can't change the culture if we don't speak to them. We have to embrace them in love. We have to be able to talk to them, identify what the root of the problem is. We have to increase our recreational opportunities. We know in our budget currently, the recreation is only 1% of the budget, being $2.1 million. We have to find a way to increase that so that when we're telling them to come away from what they're doing, we can send them to somewhere. You can't bring them out of something and don't direct them to do something that's more productive. So we have to make sure we have things in place, processes in place. We have to understand conflict resolution. How do you bring them to a place of peace? How do you become a mediator? As a pastor, I have witnessed many violent situations by being in the hospitals, eulogizing, being at families' homes, bringing the peace. My headquarters is currently located on Broadway in Auburn, right across the street from the library. 2 days after we went into that headquarters, someone was shot 4 times. 2 blocks down. We went down the street, had some conversations to identify what was going on, just to bring some peace to the neighborhood. Told them who I was, introduced myself, and started building a relationship and a bond with them to understand what's going on, what's the issues, what are your concerns. And once you build that relationship and they can trust you, then we'll see that crime will decrease. Then we'll see that we'll be able to help our youth and the situations that are going on in the street. But we can't help them if we don't speak to them. We can't help them if we're not embracing them, if we don't know them. You can't help your neighborhood if you don't know your neighbors. So we got to get to know who they are, who their families are. When we were growing up, there were police officers that knew who we were, and they would bring us back to our families to make sure. We need community policing. We need police walking the beat to make sure that they're curbing the crime. We need to make sure that the lights are working. I've been to many areas where some of the lights in the community are not working, so we have to make sure that we do all those things. Thank you.
Thank you for that excellent question. As you know, Mr. Melvin, I've been working with you shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand, for several years on issues such as the one you raised in your question. Together we work with the Brothers of Patterson, Team Charity, the Nation of Islam, and like that old cartoon, Voltron, these separate organizations come together, and when we're together working out in the street with the youth, with the people that are directly involved in some of these situations that we're trying to avoid, we like they formed Voltron, together we form what is known as the Street Keepers. So I would definitely continue to do things of that nature. But on the city council side, I think city government has to meet people where they are. You can't just write something into law and make things all better. you have to go out there and be physically there with the people, listening to their concerns, understanding their concerns, and working on ways to improve their conditions. I believe with education, with jobs, counseling, mediation services, and other programs all together, because it's no one simple solution, but all of that together, we can make a difference with this issue of violence in our community. Thank you again for that excellent question.
Thank you for the question. My first reality of Patterson, when I came here to pastor, assigned to the church there, was not long before the shooting of Lawrence Myers against the fence of our church. So I began immediately to become engaged in community and the issues of crime and violence in our city, and particularly in our neighborhood. Immediately met with the pastors in that area. We organized ourselves as congregations with faith-based community organizing effort, began to talk to the young people on our streets. I mentioned before, I was a National Fellow for Congress of National Black Churches, working with Hoffman LaRoche. We were able to get some money to provide funding to our congregations in that neighborhood in particular, to develop programs for youth and families. Several of the churches were able to engage most of those young men in programs that got them off the streets. United Presbyterian had a gym. We had space in our basement. St. Paul had space, and we developed programs for those children. So I think we need to continue to engage our young people. We developed the Family Success Center at the YWCA, a block from our church, and started as the Community Collaborative, Fifth Ward Community Collaborative, which grew into the Family Success Center that now is on Ellison Street in the city of Patterson. So we've engaged all kinds of programs to address our youth, to try to get them off the street, find alternative ways to have success in their life and in their experience. We'll continue to do that, even as a council person, certainly as the pastor of a church in the community.
Nice, thank you. Okay, my second question, and I'll start with Reverend Maven to all the candidates, is what will be your approach if elected by way of legislation to resolve mental health, drug addiction, and homelessness in the city of Patterson?
Well, I think we need to, one of my concerns is, and what I hope to do as on council, is to be a unifier. My gift is that of collaboration and bringing people together around issues. Many of our nonprofit organizations are working in isolation. We need to really come together and talk about what we can offer our community, not in isolation, but together. And I think we have the resources here in our city with a myriad of nonprofits, social service agencies, that we can do wraparound services for those persons who are in need. Again, the Family Success Center, we're doing that. We don't just deal with the parent, we deal with the child, we deal with the home, with a holistic approach to solving problems in our community. I think we need to talk about what kind of legislation we need to pass collectively. I don't think one individual, again, can do that. I think it needs to be a common vision, a common plan that not only the council, but the nonprofits, social service providers, all come together on. Let's talk about how do we solve these problems. We found that when they were gathering up homeless and peddlers on the street, most of them don't even live in Patterson. So there's another issue we need to address. So we need to look at it from a holistic approach and find solutions that we all agree upon and have the same vision in terms of the end goal to solve those myriad of problems facing our community.
Thank you. Another excellent question. What I would do in this area is work with many of the individuals that I know, and I'm sure that there are others out there that I might not be familiar with just yet. But these people are already on the ground, and they don't have the resources necessary to develop their programs and fund their programs. And I think this is where city government can step in and help out people like Teddy Martinez, who runs a program that deals with and addresses many of the categories that you spoke of. Akbar McIntyre, He runs a program. Kelly Moss Brown runs a program. These individuals have not been as successful as they would want to be and as we would want to see them with regard to bringing in funds to help them fund their programs and run their programs. I think that the city government should step in and offer grant writing seminars, put them in a position where they are more than eligible, where they meet the requirements for CDBG funds and other funds from the state, from the federal level. When they are successful with these programs, our entire city benefits. So we can't just leave them out to do and fend for themselves. Those people that I mentioned and many more represent us, the heart of Patterson. So the government must work with these people. They're the experts. They're on the ground. They know more about this than many of the people running for office, many of the people in elected positions. So we need to tap into those resources and make them more successful.
And so that's a great question. So when you talk about mental health, you talk about drug addiction, you talk about homelessness, all of that embodies people. So it's talking about investing in the human behavior or investing in the humanistic person or the wholeness of a person. So we have to identify that in each of these areas, there's an area of sickness where they need healing, they need to be fortified, they need to be empowered. So I think we need to come together with the meeting of the minds of all the non-for-profits or all the people that are in our community that are already doing the work. We need to empower them, find out what they need and what are their limitations to what they don't have. We also need to initiate where we don't have, such as we have abandoned properties in our community. I think some of those properties could be utilized to house some of these situations. We also need to identify and make sure that when other communities are coming into our communities and setting up tables and feeding on our corners that are not from Patterson, we have to make sure they have fines. I mean, they have permits and they're allowed to do that. But we also have to identify what is a priority. Where the county seat, we get the money here for the social issues that happen, but the majority of those individuals don't live here. So we have to identify, do we want to take care of Bergen County, Essex County, do we want to take care of their concerns, or do we want to make sure we put our residents in the city of Patterson first and make a do a priority listing of how do we address those issues for our people first and then spread it out. So we have to make sure we come together as a collective body so it's not one person making the decision, but it's all of us coming together and making sure that there's resources in place to get it done.
Thank you. Sister.
Tress? In all fairness, and I just am blown away by the questions. They are remarkable. But to be fair to the questions that I passed up, I'm going to have to decline.
Okay, thank you. All right. My final question, I have more than three, but I'll narrow it down to three. This one I think is very important to the candidates, and I'll start with Sister Angela and give you the opportunity to decline. Hopefully this one you'll respond to, but if not, I respect that. But the question is regarding the city's financial status, right? Through my experience in the previous council meetings, I've learned that the city spends more than it receives or more than it generates. So it spends more money than it generates. What is your plan to bring financial stability to our city government's finances?
Before I decline, I would say that in my opening remarks, I mentioned business ethics. Ethical business would alleviate the deficit. It can help alleviate it. That's it.
Thank you.
So let me say this because I know we only have a couple minutes. Good government requires change. So I am pushing forward in my 39-page plan for a strong program management office. The purpose of that is to curb wasteful spending. It allows us to manage the strategic planning process. How do we get there? What's the timeline? What are the benefits? Cost-benefit analysis. Does it make sense? What's in it for us? What do we have to do to get there? We also need to, I'm looking to create and distribute monthly performance scorecards with key metrics that says what are our priorities in cost areas, what are our priority in building, economic empowerment, economic development, our strategic financial plan for the next 3 to 5 years, so we're not operating on opportunity costs costs versus anticipated costs. Also, managing and overseeing all capital investments and provide objective analysis on our return on investment. We have a lot of people that work in this city, but they don't live here, so we don't get a return on our investment. So we're giving our money to people that work here, but they spend it in their communities. So we have to develop some language that identifies where we can hire more of our people that work here. We need to make sure that we are giving them opportunities and bringing them to the table to make sure that they take pride and they have faith in what we're doing in the community. We also need to identify opportunities to reduce costs and reinvest those dollars and reinvest it value-added initiatives like more cops on the street, equipment for our DPW workers, city-wide Employee Appreciation Day, bringing those initiatives back to make sure the morale is boosted in the community. And then we need to track all grants and timelines by making sure we have a project manager and also having a grant writer in place where it's incentive-based, where they're able to find and identify dollars that will help offset the cost so that we're not continually having to do temporary appropriation budgets, that we have costs that come up, like the recent vote down of the budget for $4.4 million. We have to anticipate costs. So when we're doing budgets, we can't do it based on opportunity costs where there's wasteful spending, but it has to be more anticipatory.
And thanks again for another excellent question. I'll start off by saying, like Dr. Mem said, waste is always an issue. That's always a problem. But like you used in your question, generating the funds is, in my opinion, the primary problem. We're just simply not making enough money to pay the bills that this city has. And in my plan, I talk about how public safety relates to economic development. The two go hand in hand. You really can't have one without the other. So we would study cities that are similar in nature, size, population, and what have you. You can look at Newark, for instance, how they cleaned up areas of Newark and made them attractions for commerce. They're earning ratables because of this. So we can't leave out public safety when we talk about generating revenue. That is something that is very important to that. We also must become, and I talk about this in my plan, we must become a client-centered city. And by client, I'm talking about the residents, the people who do business here. We can't appear just to be a statutory form of government where we're just here, you can come, you can take it or leave it. We have to cater to specific businesses that will help our individuals that live here become employed in those businesses. In Newark, they have an infrastructure dealing with fiber optic cable. So now they are a hub and they are attracting IT businesses. We need to follow that lead, not doing the exact same thing, but we need to capitalize on the things that we have that companies will benefit from, bringing those companies, those businesses to our city. And we will develop more ways of generating revenue through that.
I agree, it's a great question, and I agree with my colleagues. We need to find innovative ways to generate revenue for our city. But then I don't want to make it sound as difficult as it is. It's a simple matter of budgeting, you know. We have to do it every day in our homes. Budgeting is simply telling your money where you want it to go rather than asking where it went. And we got to find ways to streamline our budget so we can't spend the money that you don't have. And then until we find ways to bring in new revenue, we need to find a way to streamline the budget. People talked about a forensic audit and all those things. Well, that's fine as well, but also we need to hold people accountable who are responsible for the finances of our city. We know that we're under the eye of the state, and in terms of dollars we spend, they're looking at it. So we have to be careful that we stay within the guidelines and restrictions that have been put on us until we generate the kind of revenue that I think we can generate if we have a common vision for Patterson to move us forward. And with all the rich resources that we have in this city, we can find ways to generate new revenue and new income that will benefit all the citizens of Patterson.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Melvin. Our next candidate for the question and answer part is Lisa Mims.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And so my first question will be open to everyone. How many libraries are in the city of Patterson?
I'm not sure of the number. I know there was a movement to try to get libraries open in the schools in particular. I was part of that process. I know the schools in our neighborhood that we've worked with to try to make sure that they were adequate supplies and books. In fact, we had several book fairs at our church to work with the Kilpatrick School across the street from us to make sure that the children had opportunities to have reading materials and literacy education.
The two that I'm aware of, one on Broadway, one in South Patterson. There used to be one, and I don't know if it's still there, in the Market Street area, but those are the two that I know about that are up and running.
Okay, the libraries. Does that include the free libraries in the park?
No, sir.
Okay, all right.
I know you know that number.
Okay, all right. Okay, the public libraries, I believe that there are three. The South Patterson Library, the Broadway Main Library, and I believe the one on Union Avenue is still active. So I want to say three libraries.
Thank you. My second question, which is two parts. Who's the founder of Patterson, and what year was Patterson founded? I made sure it was down.
Oh, I can go first. Thank you. The key, that's a good question, right? And what I've learned through education is that if you don't know the answer, you got to know how to find the answer. So I look right behind me, and the answer is right above my head, 1792. In the old place where I'm from, Alexander Hamilton Development, Alexander Hamilton founded it in 1792 as the first industrial city, and was classified that from the power of the Great Falls. I know I'm giving too much, but all that goes together. Thank you.
The only thing I'll add is that Google says it's 1791.
And so it was probably between 1791 and 1792. Alexander Hamilton, and certainly the first industrial city, historical significance for the city of Patterson that I think we could take advantage of in terms of getting tourism back here.
So, my last question? Wait. So my last question, Angela Muhammad?
Answer this one
Yeah.
about Patterson? Okay, I still have to be fair, so I'm going to have to humbly decline, although I worked at the Patterson Museum,
No.
but I decline.
Thank you. And so that's all my questions for today.
Thank you, Mrs. Mims. Our next candidate who's up for question and answer is Angela Muhammad, Miss Angela Muhammad, and she has declined to ask any questions. Thank you, Ms. Muhammad.